My name is Savannah Mitchell, 28 years old, and I was standing backstage at the Palmer House Hotel watching my parents present my brother Tyler with $15 million that legally belonged to me. The cameras were rolling, 500 Chicago elite were applauding, and Tyler was delivering his acceptance speech about family generosity and charitable giving. What none of them knew was that every single dollar being gifted away had been stolen from my grandmother's trust fund just 6 months earlier. I clutched the original will in my trembling hands and made the decision that would destroy my family forever. I walked onto that stage. Before we dive into what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready for a story about family betrayal that'll make your own relatives look like saints, hit that like button and subscribe because this journey of revenge and justice is just getting started. Trust me, you won't believe how deep this deception goes. The Mitchell family had ruled Chicago's social scene for 3 generations. Our real estate empire stretched across the Midwest. Our name graced hospital wings and university buildings, and every charity gala worth attending featured us prominently on the guest list. My father, Richard Mitchell, commanded respect in boardrooms and country clubs alike, while my mother, Catherine, had perfected the art of gracious manipulation disguised as social duty. To the outside world, we were American aristocracy at its finest. Tyler, my 31-year-old brother, embodied everything my parents wanted in a son. Tall, charming, with the kind of easy smile that made investors write checks and socialites swoon at dinner parties. He'd started 3 different businesses in the past 5 years, each venture more ambitious than the last. What nobody knew was that every single one had failed spectacularly, burning through millions of family money while Tyler played the role of successful entrepreneur. Meanwhile, I'd built my career as a corporate lawyer from the ground up, graduating summa cum laude from Northwestern Law and making partner at Hartwell and Associates by 26. My achievements earned polite acknowledgement at family gatherings, quickly overshadowed by whatever new venture Tyler was launching that week. I'd learned early that success meant nothing if you were born the wrong gender in the Mitchell family hierarchy. The annual Mitchell Foundation Charity Gala was our family's crown jewel event, held every December in the Palmer House's ornate ballroom. This year's beneficiary was Children's Memorial Hospital, and my parents had promised their largest donation ever. 500 guests dressed in black tie finery, local news cameras capturing every moment, and Tyler positioned as the evening's star presenter. The family foundation had supposedly grown so successful under his leadership that we could afford unprecedented generosity. What made this particular evening devastating was my discovery of the truth behind our family's supposed prosperity. 6 months earlier, my beloved grandmother Eleanor had passed away after battling cancer. She'd been the one person who truly saw me for who I was, encouraging my independence and celebrating my achievements when my parents dismissed them. Her funeral had been a blur of grief and social obligations, but the reading of her will 2 weeks later changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Eleanor Mitchell had left me $15 million in an irrevocable trust, established specifically for my independence and future. The will was crystal clear about her intentions, stating that the money was meant to ensure I'd never have to depend on family approval or financial support to live my life authentically. She'd watched my parents diminish my accomplishments for years and wanted to guarantee my freedom from their control. My parents' reaction to the inheritance had been immediate and calculating. Within days of the will reading, they'd convinced me to let them manage the transfer process, citing tax implications and family investment strategies that required temporary consolidation. I'd been grieving and overwhelmed, trusting that my own parents wouldn't steal from their daughter. That trust had been the biggest mistake of my life. Tonight, as I watched Tyler accept applause for distributing my inheritance to charity, I finally understood the depth of their betrayal. The $15 million being celebrated as Mitchell family generosity was my grandmother's gift to me, illegally transferred into the family foundation account with forged signatures and manipulated legal documents. My name had been systematically erased from every piece of paperwork, replaced with Tyler's as the foundation's primary beneficiary and director. Standing in the wings of that ballroom stage, listening to Tyler talk about family values and philanthropic responsibility, I felt something inside me break and reassemble into something harder. These people who claimed to love me had stolen my future and were using it to enhance their own reputation. The cameras that were meant to capture their generosity were about to witness their destruction instead. Tyler was in the middle of his acceptance speech when I walked onto that stage. The spotlight hit me like a revelation, and I saw my parents' faces drain of color in the front row. Tyler's words died in his throat as I approached the microphone, my heels clicking against the wooden stage with the precision of a countdown timer. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom with devastating clarity, "I need to correct something my brother just said. You cannot give away money that was never yours to begin with. This $15 million belongs to me, stolen from my inheritance through fraud and forgery." The silence that followed felt like the entire world holding its breath. Tyler stepped back from the microphone, confusion and panic warring across his perfect features. In the audience, I could see phones lifting as guests began recording what they sensed would be the scandal of the decade. The news cameras that had come to capture Charity continued rolling, now documenting the implosion of Chicago's most respected family. I pulled out the original will and legal documents I'd kept hidden in my purse, my hands surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "This is my grandmother Eleanor Mitchell's will, dated 18 months ago, leaving me $15 million explicitly for my independence. This," I held up a second set of papers, "is the forged documentation my parents created to steal that inheritance and transfer it to a family foundation they control." The hospital's development director, Margaret Walsh, who had been beaming with gratitude moments earlier, now looked like she'd been slapped. She approached the microphone with uncertainty, asking if there was some mistake that could be clarified privately. I looked directly into the camera and said, "The only mistake was my family believing they could steal from me without consequences." My father Richard shot to his feet, his face flushed with rage and embarrassment. "Savannah has been struggling with mental health issues since her grandmother's death," he announced to the crowd, his voice carrying the authority that had intimidated business rivals for decades. "This is clearly a breakdown triggered by grief and jealousy of her brother's success." My mother Catherine followed his lead perfectly, as she always did, rising with tears already streaming down her carefully made-up face. "We've been trying to get Savannah help for months," she said, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. "She's always been jealous of Tyler's achievements, and losing her grandmother has made her paranoid and unstable." Tyler, recovering from his initial shock, stepped toward me with the concerned expression he'd perfected over years of manipulating his way out of consequences. "Savannah, honey, we talked about this. The inheritance was combined with family assets for tax purposes. You're going to embarrass yourself and hurt people who love you." But I was beyond caring about embarrassment or their version of love. I read directly from my grandmother's will, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I leave this inheritance to my granddaughter Savannah Mitchell with the explicit understanding that it remains separate from all family holdings, to be used solely for her independence and future, free from the control and manipulation that has defined her upbringing." The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. Several people in the audience were openly filming now, and I could see the news cameras zooming in on the documents in my hands. Hotel security began moving toward the stage, summoned by some invisible signal from my parents, but Margaret Walsh held up a hand to stop them. The charity director's face had gone pale as the implications became clear. "Are you saying that the foundation's donation tonight was made with funds that were illegally obtained?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "I'm saying that every dollar my brother just ceremonially donated was stolen from me 6 months ago," I replied, looking directly into the main news camera. "And I have documentation to prove it." My father tried one more time to control the narrative, his voice booming across the ballroom. "Remove her from the stage immediately. She's clearly having a psychotic episode and needs medical attention, not public humiliation." But the damage was done. The video was already spreading on social media, shared by guests who'd captured the confrontation on their phones. The hashtag Mitchell family scandal started trending within the hour, and every major Chicago news outlet picked up the story before midnight. I'd walked onto that stage as the family disappointment and walked off as the woman who'd exposed one of the city's most respected dynasties as thieves and fraudsters. The last thing I saw before security finally escorted me out was Tyler's face, no longer charming and confident, but twisted with the kind of rage that comes when someone's true nature is finally revealed to the world. The next morning brought the full force of my family's retaliation. By 8 a.m., my phone was buzzing with calls from partners at Hartwell and Associates, all expressing concern about my behavior at the gala. Someone had contacted every senior lawyer at my firm overnight, painting me as unstable and questioning whether I was fit to represent major clients. The concerned caller, I later learned, had been my own father. Richard Mitchell didn't just want to discredit me, he wanted to systematically destroy every aspect of my life until I had no choice but to crawl back and accept whatever scraps they were willing to offer. His first move was assembling a legal team that read like a who's who of Chicago's most ruthless corporate attorneys. Within 48 hours, they'd filed motions to contest my grandmother's will on grounds of undue influence and mental incompetency. The narrative they constructed was devastatingly simple. Savannah Mitchell, jealous of her successful brother and unstable since her grandmother's death, had manipulated an elderly woman into leaving her money that rightfully belonged to the family trust. They produced medical records showing Eleanor's cancer treatments, suggesting her judgment had been compromised by medication and grief. They painted me as a predator who'd taken advantage of a dying woman's vulnerability. My mother, Catherine, deployed her social weapons with surgical precision. Within a week of the gala confrontation, whispers began circulating at every country club, charity board meeting, and society dinner party in Chicago. Savannah had always been difficult, they said. She'd struggled with drinking in college, they claimed. She'd never been able to handle Tyler's success, they insisted. Catherine Mitchell had spent 30 years building relationships with every influential woman in the city, and now she called in every favor to destroy her own daughter's reputation. Tyler's role in their strategy was perhaps the cruelest. He gave a series of carefully orchestrated interviews to local media, presenting himself as the wounded brother trying to understand his sister's destructive behavior. He spoke movingly about growing up with someone who'd always resented his achievements, who'd never been able to celebrate family success without trying to tear it down. The interviews painted him as generous, confused, and deeply hurt by my allegations. "I love my sister," he told Channel 7 News, his eyes glistening with what appeared to be genuine tears. "But she's been spiraling since grandmother died, and this attack on our family is just the latest escalation. We've tried to help her, but she keeps pushing us away and creating these elaborate conspiracy theories to explain her own failures." The legal assault intensified when their team discovered a technicality in the way my grandmother's will had been executed. One of the required witnesses to the signing had moved out of state shortly after the ceremony, and when contacted by my family's lawyers, she suddenly claimed she couldn't remember the specifics of what she'd witnessed. The second witness, Eleanor's longtime housekeeper, received an unexpected visit from investigators who questioned her about the circumstances surrounding the will's creation. Within 2 weeks, what had seemed like an airtight legal case began showing cracks. The judge ordered a forensic examination of all documents related to the inheritance, but he also granted my family's request to freeze the disputed funds pending the investigation's outcome. I went from believing justice was imminent to watching my inheritance disappear into legal limbo. The professional consequences arrived with devastating speed. My biggest client, Morrison Development, pulled out of a major contract worth $200,000 to my firm, citing concerns about my judgment and stability. Other clients began requesting different attorneys for their cases, and I found myself isolated at partners' meetings where colleagues who'd once respected my work now exchanged worried glances when I spoke. The social exile was equally brutal. Friends I'd known since college stopped returning my calls. Invitations to charity events and social gatherings simply stopped arriving. When I encountered former friends at the few public places I still frequented, they'd offer sympathetic smiles and concerned comments about my difficult time, all while maintaining careful distance as if my alleged instability might be contagious. The most devastating blow came from Jessica Hartwell, my best friend since law school and daughter of my firm's founding partner. We'd been bridesmaids in each other's weddings, shared everything from career disappointments to relationship dramas, and I'd trusted her with my deepest fears about my family's treatment of me over the years. "Savannah, I love you, but you have to see how this looks," Jessica said over coffee at a downtown cafe, choosing a table in the back corner where we wouldn't be overheard. "Your family is worried sick about you, and honestly, the way you're handling this whole situation is concerning. Maybe they're right about you needing some professional help to work through your grief and resentment." The betrayal in that moment cut deeper than anything my family had done. Jessica had witnessed their dismissive treatment of my accomplishments, had listened to me cry about feeling invisible in my own family, and now she was parroting their narrative about my mental state. When I tried to show her copies of the legal documents proving the theft, she gently pushed them away and suggested I was too close to the situation to see it clearly. By the end of my family's first month of warfare, I was professionally sidelined, socially isolated, and beginning to question my own perception of reality. Their campaign had been so thorough, so coordinated, that even I started wondering if grief had somehow distorted my understanding of what had actually happened with the inheritance. Just when isolation threatened to crush my remaining sanity, my cousin Amanda reached out with what appeared to be a lifeline. Amanda was Richard's brother's daughter, someone I'd grown up with at family gatherings, but had never been particularly close to. She called 3 weeks after the gala disaster, claiming she'd been horrified by what she'd witnessed and wanted to help me fight back against what she called Uncle Richard's typical bullying tactics. "I've seen him do this before, Savannah," Amanda confided during our first meeting at a small cafe far from the downtown area where we might be recognized. "He destroyed my dad's business partnership the same way when they disagreed about company direction. The character assassination, the legal manipulation, the way he turns everyone against his target. It's like watching a predator hunt." Amanda seemed to have inside information about my parents' strategy that proved invaluable. She warned me that they were planning to challenge my mental competency through forced psychological evaluation. She told me about conversations she'd overheard regarding attempts to bribe the witnesses to my grandmother's will. Most importantly, she claimed to have access to financial records that could prove the illegal transfer of my inheritance. For 3 weeks, I confided everything to Amanda. I shared my legal strategy, my emotional vulnerabilities, and my desperate hope that someone in the family finally understood the truth about Richard and Catherine's manipulation. She listened with sympathy, offered practical advice, and became the sister I'd never had in Tyler. When she suggested recording some of our conversations to document the family's corruption, I agreed without hesitation. The trap closed with devastating precision. During what I thought was a private conversation about my parents' history of financial manipulation, Amanda guided me toward increasingly inflammatory statements about their character and business practices. She drew out admissions about my anger, my desire for revenge, and my willingness to destroy their reputation if that's what it took to get justice. Every word was being recorded for my family's legal team. The setup became clear when my family's lawyers produced transcripts of conversations I'd never known were being recorded. In their motion to dismiss my inheritance claim, they painted me as vindictive, obsessed with destroying my family, and willing to make false accusations to satisfy my jealousy. The recordings made me sound paranoid and vengeful, exactly the kind of unstable person who might manipulate a dying grandmother for financial gain. Worse than the legal implications was the emotional devastation of realizing that Amanda had been playing a role from our first conversation. Every moment of sympathy, every piece of advice, every expression of family solidarity had been calculated manipulation designed to make me expose my vulnerabilities. The loneliness I'd felt during my isolation had made me desperate for any family connection, and they'd weaponized that desperation against me. The professional consequences of Amanda's betrayal arrived within days. My law firm's senior partners called an emergency meeting, presenting evidence of what they termed my increasingly erratic behavior and questionable judgment. Client complaints had mysteriously appeared, all dated after the gala incident, describing concerns about my emotional stability and professional competence. The complaints followed an obvious pattern that suggested coordination, but proving their fabrication would require resources and time I didn't have. Morrison Development claimed I'd made inappropriate comments about my family during business meetings. Hartwell Industries alleged that I discussed personal legal battles during client consultations. Each complaint painted me as someone whose personal problems were affecting professional judgment. "Savannah, we've been friends for 15 years, said Gerald Hartwell, the firm's senior partner and Jessica's father. "You're one of our most talented attorneys, but these allegations about your recent behavior are serious. Combined with the very public incident at the charity gala, we have to protect both you and the firm's reputation. We're placing you on indefinite administrative leave pending a full investigation." The financial warfare escalated simultaneously. Credit cards that I'd held for years were suddenly canceled due to changes in creditworthiness. Bank accounts were frozen following reports of suspicious activity that required extensive investigation. My car loan was mysteriously accelerated, demanding immediate payment of the full balance. Even my apartment lease came under scrutiny when the management company received concerns about income stability from anonymous sources. Within a month of trusting Amanda, I'd gone from successful attorney to unemployed pariah living off rapidly dwindling savings, while mounting legal bills consumed what resources remained. The most cruel irony was that the $15 million I was fighting to reclaim sat frozen in legal limbo, while I rationed groceries and skipped meals to afford basic utilities. The health toll became undeniable. Panic attacks struck without warning, leaving me gasping for air in grocery store aisles or during conversations with my remaining lawyer. Insomnia plagued every night as my mind cycled through endless replays of family betrayals and professional humiliations. Weight dropped off my frame as stress killed my appetite and constant anxiety burned through whatever calories I managed to consume. Most devastating was the creeping doubt about my own sanity. My family's gaslighting campaign had been so thorough, so coordinated, that I began questioning whether my perception of events could be trusted. Perhaps grief had distorted my memories of the will reading. Maybe my resentment toward Tyler had clouded my judgment about the inheritance. When everyone around you insists you're wrong about your own experiences, maintaining faith in your reality becomes an exhausting daily battle. The breaking point came when I discovered that Tyler had never actually succeeded at any business venture on his own merit. Every company he'd started, every investment he'd made, every entrepreneurial success he'd claimed had been secretly funded by money siphoned from various family trusts and accounts. His reputation as a successful businessman was as fabricated as my parents' claims about family generosity. Understanding that Tyler's entire identity was built on dependency, not achievement, revealed the true reason for my parents' favoritism. They didn't celebrate Tyler because he was successful, they celebrated him because his success was completely controlled by them. My independence, my self-made career, my ability to thrive without their approval or financial support represented everything they feared losing control over. By month 2 of my family's warfare, social exile had become complete isolation. Former friends crossed streets to avoid awkward encounters, professional colleagues stopped returning emails entirely, and invitations to any social events simply stopped arriving. The few people who still acknowledged my existence did so with the careful sympathy reserved for someone recovering from a nervous breakdown. My family's victory lap was performed with characteristic social grace. Tyler officially received his $15 million foundation grant in a follow-up ceremony designed to repair any damage from my unfortunate outburst at the original gala. Local media covered the rededication event, praising the Mitchell family's continued commitment to charitable giving despite facing difficult personal challenges with an unstable family member. Richard and Catherine gave carefully orchestrated interviews about their troubled daughter, who was receiving professional help for grief-related mental health issues. They spoke movingly about the difficulty of watching someone you love lose touch with reality, while emphasizing their continued hope for my eventual recovery and reconciliation with the family. Their performance was flawless, painting themselves as loving parents dealing with tragedy while maintaining their philanthropic commitments. The charity benefits continued with enhanced Mitchell family prestige. Other wealthy families, impressed by their grace under pressure and commitment to giving despite personal difficulties, increased their own donations in support. The scandal that should have destroyed their reputation had somehow strengthened their position in Chicago society while completely erasing me from their narrative. Living became a daily exercise in humiliation. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, taped to my apartment door for neighbors to see. My savings had been depleted by legal fees and the inability to work, while mounting bills created an avalanche of financial obligations I couldn't meet. The car was repossessed from the parking garage, leaving me dependent on public transportation in a city where professional success required reliable mobility. Food became a luxury rather than necessity. I learned to stretch single meals across multiple days, to shop exclusively in clearance sections, and to ignore the hunger pangs that accompanied constant stress. The designer clothes that had been part of my professional image hung loose on my shrinking frame, creating a visual reminder of how completely my life had deteriorated. The lowest point came when my last remaining friend, Sarah Chin, suggested over coffee that maybe it was time to consider apologizing to my family and accepting whatever settlement they might offer. Sometimes being right isn't worth destroying your entire life, she said gently, not understanding that what she was suggesting felt like surrendering my soul. Maybe they're offering to let you back in if you just acknowledge that grief affected your judgment, Sarah continued, meaning to be helpful. Your parents love you, Savannah. They just want their daughter back. Fighting this battle is costing you everything, and for what? Even if you win eventually, look at what you've lost in the process. That conversation forced me to confront the possibility that maybe my family was right about my mental state. Maybe grief had distorted my perception of events. Maybe the inheritance had been handled properly and my accusations were the product of jealousy and emotional instability. The doubt was poison, seeping into every thought and memory until I couldn't trust my own experiences anymore. My lawyer delivered the final blow the next day, advising me to accept whatever settlement my family offered rather than risk losing everything in a trial I might not win. The evidence is circumstantial at best, he explained with the weary tone of someone who'd realized his client couldn't afford his continued representation. Your family's legal team has systematically undermined every witness and document we planned to present. Continuing this fight could leave you with nothing. That night, sitting alone in my nearly empty apartment with another eviction notice and a bank account showing $17, I seriously considered giving up entirely. Not just the legal battle, but everything. The systematic destruction of my life had been so complete, so thorough, that starting over felt impossible. Even if I somehow survived this, who would hire an attorney who'd been professionally discredited? Who would trust someone whose own family had publicly questioned their sanity? The revelation that saved my life came while cleaning out my grandmother's storage unit, a monthly fee I could barely afford but couldn't bring myself to abandon. Hidden behind Christmas decorations and old furniture, I discovered a small safe I'd never noticed before. Inside were documents my parents had never found, letters and financial records that painted a devastating picture of my family's true history. Eleanor's papers revealed that this wasn't the first time Richard had stolen from family trusts. 20 years earlier, he'd embezzled money from his own father's estate, using forged documents and manipulated legal proceedings nearly identical to what he'd done to me. The pattern of financial abuse stretched back decades, with Richard systematically looting any family asset he could access while maintaining a facade of prosperity and success. More importantly, I found letters my grandmother had written but never sent, documenting her growing awareness of Richard's true character and her determination to protect me from his manipulation. Savannah is the only one strong enough to break this cycle, she'd written in a letter dated just weeks before her death. Richard has spent his entire life controlling others through money and fear, but Savannah has built something he can't touch. If anything happens to me, she's the only hope this family has for justice. Reading those words in my grandmother's careful handwriting, I understood that my fight wasn't just about the inheritance. Eleanor had seen the pattern of abuse and manipulation that defined our family dynamics, and she'd specifically chosen me to break that cycle. The money wasn't just for my independence, it was a weapon she'd placed in my hands to fight back against decades of systematic exploitation. Two new allies emerged from this revelation. Marcus Thompson, an investigative journalist who'd been following white-collar crime in Chicago's elite families, contacted me after seeing the viral gala video and sensing there was a deeper story worth investigating. Linda Rodriguez, my family's former accountant, reached out after reading about my legal battle, claiming she had information about financial irregularities she'd witnessed, but been too afraid to report while still employed by my parents. Both Marcus and Linda had their own reasons for wanting to expose my family's corruption. Marcus was building a reputation for investigations that revealed the dark side of Chicago's most respected dynasties, while Linda had been forced to quit her job after refusing to participate in what she knew were illegal financial manipulations. Together, we formed an unlikely alliance united by our shared desire to see justice done. For the first time since the gala confrontation, I wasn't fighting alone anymore. More importantly, I finally understood that winning this battle meant more than reclaiming my inheritance. It meant stopping a pattern of abuse that had destroyed other family members and would continue destroying future generations if someone didn't have the courage to expose the truth. Marcus Thompson's investigation began with public records, but quickly expanded into the shadowy world of family trust manipulation and financial fraud that my father had perfected over decades. As a journalist specializing in white-collar crime among Chicago's elite, Marcus understood how families like mine operated behind their facade of respectability and charitable giving. Your family isn't unique, Marcus explained during our first strategic meeting in his cluttered downtown office. I've seen this pattern before. Wealthy families that maintain their status by systematically looting trust funds, manipulating legal documents, and destroying anyone who threatens to expose their crimes. The difference is that most victims don't have the legal background to fight back effectively. Linda Rodriguez proved to be the most valuable ally in our growing coalition. As my family's accountant for 8 years, she'd witnessed financial irregularities that individually seemed minor but collectively painted a picture of systematic fraud. She'd been forced to process transfers between accounts that made no sense, to prepare tax documents that didn't match actual financial activity, and to maintain 2 sets of books for different purposes. I quit because I knew they were setting me up to be the fall guy if anyone ever investigated their finances, Linda confided during our second meeting. When the law requires certain documentation for trust fund transfers and you're being ordered to ignore those requirements, you're either part of the crime or you get out. I chose to get out, but I kept copies of everything because I knew someday the truth would matter. The evidence Linda provided was devastating. Bank records showed systematic diversion of funds from various family trusts into accounts controlled exclusively by my father. Estate planning documents revealed a pattern of forged signatures and manipulated legal language that had been used to steal from multiple family members over the years. Tax filings showed income being attributed to sources that didn't exist, creating phantom profits to justify lifestyle expenditures that far exceeded legitimate earnings. Marcus's research uncovered additional victims of my family's financial predation. My great-uncle William had died 5 years earlier, leaving a substantial estate that had somehow been consolidated into family holdings despite his will specifying individual beneficiaries. 2 cousins on my father's side had seen their inheritance trusts depleted through management fees and administrative costs that had effectively transferred their money to my parents' control. The pattern was always the same. A family member would die or become incapacitated, leaving money in trust for specific beneficiaries. Richard would volunteer to manage the estate transition, claiming expertise and family loyalty. Legal documents would be subtly modified, signatures would be forged when necessary, and the inheritance would disappear into accounts he controlled. By the time beneficiaries realized what had happened, the legal and financial resources needed to fight back were beyond their reach. Tyler's role in these schemes became clearer through Marcus's investigation. He wasn't just a beneficiary of stolen money. He was an active participant in the family's fraud operation. His various business ventures had been elaborate money laundering schemes designed to give stolen trust funds the appearance of legitimate investment income. When those businesses inevitably failed, the losses were written off as ordinary investment risks while the transferred funds remained safely in family accounts. Building our legal case required a new attorney with expertise in financial fraud and elder abuse. The recommendation came from Linda, who knew a former prosecutor named David Kim specializing in complex white-collar cases involving family trust manipulation. David's approach was fundamentally different from my previous lawyer's defensive strategy. "We're not just trying to recover your inheritance," David explained during our first consultation. "We're building a criminal case for systematic financial fraud that spans decades. Your money is just the most recent example of a pattern that includes multiple victims and probably millions of dollars in stolen assets." The investigation strategy focused on documenting every instance of financial manipulation my family had committed, creating a timeline that would demonstrate systematic criminal behavior rather than isolated incidents that might be explained as administrative errors or family disagreements. We needed to prove that the theft of my inheritance was part of a larger criminal enterprise, not a misunderstanding that could be resolved through civil litigation. Personal healing became essential to sustaining the fight ahead. Therapy with Dr. Sarah Martinez, who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse, helped me understand that my experiences weren't unique or shameful. She'd worked with other victims of family exploitation, helping them recognize manipulation patterns and rebuild their sense of reality after years of gaslighting. Financial abuse within families is more common than people realize, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our early sessions. The victims are often the most successful family members, precisely because their independence threatens the control that abusive family systems require to function. Your parents didn't steal from you despite your success. They stole from you because of it. Understanding family dynamics as abuse patterns rather than personal failures transformed my perspective on everything that had happened. The favoritism toward Tyler, the systematic dismissal of my achievements, the social isolation that followed my accusations weren't responses to my behavior. They were calculated strategies designed to maintain control and power within a dysfunctional family system. The counterattack required patience and strategic thinking rather than emotional retaliation. Every piece of evidence had to be documented, every witness statement had to be corroborated, and every legal filing had to anticipate my family's likely responses. They had money, social connections, and years of experience destroying people who threatened them. We had truth, determination, and growing evidence of systematic criminality. As our case developed, my family's desperation became increasingly obvious. Attempts to silence Linda through legal threats escalated to private investigators, following her to work, and anonymous phone calls warning her about the consequences of betraying former employers. Marcus received similar harassment, including attempts to discredit his journalism through planted stories about his personal life and professional ethics. Their tactics confirmed that we were on the right track, but also demonstrated the resources they were willing to deploy to protect themselves. The real battle was just beginning, and my family had shown they would use any weapon available to maintain their power and reputation. Marcus's investigation exploded into public consciousness through a three-part series in the Chicago Tribune titled The Mitchell Empire, a Legacy of Family Fraud. The first article documented 20 years of financial manipulation within one of Chicago's most respected families, complete with court records, financial documents, and interviews with multiple victims who had finally found the courage to speak publicly. The series revealed financial fraud totaling more than $40 million, stolen from family trusts, charitable foundations, and estate settlements that my father had managed over 2 decades. Tyler's business ventures were exposed as elaborate money laundering operations, with detailed analysis of how stolen funds were transferred through failed companies to emerge as apparently legitimate investment losses. Public reaction was swift and devastating for my family's carefully constructed reputation. Social media erupted with the hashtag Justice for Savannah as people shared the articles and expressed outrage at the systematic exploitation of family trust. The original gala confrontation video resurged with new context, viewed now not as the outburst of an unstable woman, but as a brave victim exposing criminal behavior. The legal victories began immediately after the Tribune's series publication. Judge Catherine Morrison, who had been presiding over my inheritance dispute, ordered an emergency forensic audit of all Mitchell family financial accounts. The motion to freeze disputed funds was reversed, with the court acknowledging substantial evidence of financial fraud that demanded immediate investigation rather than continued delay. David Kim's criminal complaint against my parents gained momentum as prosecutors realized the scope of potential charges. Elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, money laundering, and conspiracy charges were all being considered as the investigation expanded beyond my case to include other victims who had come forward after reading Marcus's articles. The family's high-powered legal team began distancing themselves from my parents as the criminal implications became clear. Corporate attorneys who specialized in civil litigation suddenly found themselves advising clients facing potential federal fraud charges, a situation requiring different expertise and carrying significant reputational risks for their law firms. New allies emerged from unexpected places. Charity organizations that had received Mitchell family donations began questioning whether their benefactors' money had been legally obtained. The children's hospital that had been the intended recipient of my stolen inheritance announced they were placing the funds in escrow pending legal resolution, effectively acknowledging that accepting potentially stolen money would create their own legal and ethical problems. Society friends who had shunned me after the gala began reaching out privately, some offering apologies while others sought to distance themselves from my family before their own reputations suffered by association. Jessica Hartwell, my former best friend, left voicemails that I didn't return, apparently realizing that she'd chosen the wrong side of a battle that was no longer about family dynamics, but criminal behavior. My parents' desperation manifested in increasingly reckless attempts to control the narrative and intimidate witnesses. Richard attempted to bribe Marcus with a six-figure consulting contract in exchange for killing the Tribune series, an offer that Marcus recorded and turned over to federal investigators. The bribery attempt added obstruction of justice charges to the growing list of potential federal crimes. Catherine's approach focused on emotional manipulation, contacting family members and former friends to spread stories about my supposed mental instability and drug problems. When those tactics failed to gain traction, she escalated to threatening Linda Rodriguez with false criminal charges related to her accounting work, claiming she had embezzled money that had actually been stolen by my parents. Tyler's breakdown became public when he appeared on local television completely intoxicated, rambling about family loyalty and claiming that he was being made a scapegoat for business decisions he hadn't made. The interview was so incoherent that the station cut it short, but not before Tyler inadvertently admitted that he had known about financial irregularities in his foundation work. The most dramatic moment came when Tyler attempted to flee the country with what remained of his accessible funds. Federal agents arrested him at O'Hare Airport with over $200,000 in cash and a one-way ticket to Switzerland, where he apparently believed family money was hidden in accounts beyond U.S. legal jurisdiction. The arrest video, showing Tyler in handcuffs being led through the airport by federal agents, became the symbolic image of my family's downfall. The man who had been celebrated as a successful entrepreneur and philanthropist was revealed as a desperate criminal trying to flee justice with stolen money. Financial institutions began freezing Mitchell family accounts as federal investigators expanded their inquiry into potential money laundering and tax evasion charges. Assets that my parents had hidden in offshore accounts were traced and frozen, revealing the true scope of their financial crimes and eliminating resources they might have used to continue fighting the charges against them. My professional rehabilitation began almost as quickly as my family's reputation collapsed. Hartwell and Associates offered full reinstatement with a public apology and immediate promotion to senior partner, acknowledging that my leave had been based on false information provided by family members with criminal motivations. The Bar Association not only cleared me of all ethics complaints, but issued a statement praising my courage in exposing financial crimes despite personal and professional costs. Major clients who had terminated their relationships with me began reaching out to resume business relationships, some specifically requesting to work with an attorney who had demonstrated such integrity under pressure. Speaking invitations arrived from legal conferences and nonprofit organizations focused on elder abuse prevention and family financial protection. The most satisfying vindication came when the Morrison development contract that had been canceled due to questions about my stability was renewed with additional work, as the company realized that an attorney willing to fight corruption even within her own family was exactly the kind of legal representation they needed for their own business dealings. The federal indictments came down 6 months after Marcus's Tribune series, charging Richard and Catherine Mitchell with elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Tyler faced additional charges of obstruction of justice and attempted flight to avoid prosecution, with his airport arrest serving as undeniable evidence of consciousness of guilt. The criminal trial became Chicago's most closely watched white-collar prosecution in years. Evidence that David Kim and federal prosecutors presented painted a devastating picture of systematic family exploitation spanning 2 decades. Financial records showed more than $40 million stolen from various family trusts, charitable foundations, and estate settlements that my parents had manipulated for personal gain. Tyler's recorded confession, obtained during a cooperation meeting where he'd hoped to negotiate reduced charges by implicating his parents, provided prosecutors with detailed knowledge of how the family's criminal operation functioned. His desperate attempt to save himself by revealing every aspect of their fraud schemes eliminated any possibility of claiming innocence or ignorance about the systematic nature of their crimes. The civil court victory in my inheritance case was swift and comprehensive once criminal charges established the scope of my family's financial crimes. Judge Morrison not only ordered immediate return of my full $15 million inheritance, but awarded additional damages for emotional distress, professional harm, and legal expenses that totaled nearly $3 million more. Interest and penalties for the illegal use of my inheritance added another $2 million to the judgment, bringing my total award to $20 million. The court also ordered my parents to pay all legal costs for both the criminal defense and civil litigation, effectively ensuring that any remaining family assets would be consumed by the consequences of their crimes. Professional redemption exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Hartwell and Associates not only reinstated me with full partnership rights, but created a new practice area focused on family financial abuse and elder protection, with me as the founding director. The publicity from successfully fighting my family's corruption had established me as a leading expert in an area of law that was gaining increased attention from prosecutors and advocacy groups. Speaking engagements at legal conferences, law schools, and nonprofit organizations provided opportunities to educate other attorneys about recognizing and combating financial abuse within families. The Mitchell case became a textbook example of how systematic financial exploitation operates and can be successfully prosecuted when victims have the resources and courage to fight back. The Bar Association's recognition went beyond simply clearing ethics complaints to actively celebrating my case as an example of attorney integrity under extreme pressure. Several legal publications featured articles about my battle, emphasizing that fighting corruption within one's own family demonstrated the kind of professional courage that the legal profession should aspire to embody. My family's complete downfall unfolded with the inexorable logic of consequences, finally catching up to decades of criminal behavior. Richard received an 8-year federal prison sentence, with additional state charges pending that could extend his incarceration significantly. The judge specifically noted that his position of trust within his own family and the broader community made his crimes particularly heinous and deserving of substantial punishment. Catherine's sentence of 6 years reflected her cooperation in providing evidence against Richard, but the judge emphasized that her role in destroying her own daughter's reputation and professional life demonstrated a level of cruelty that demanded serious consequences. Her tearful apology during sentencing rang hollow, given the systematic nature of her participation in the family's criminal enterprise. Tyler's 5-year sentence included 3 years of supervised release and complete restitution of funds he had personally received through the fraudulent foundation schemes. His attempted flight to avoid prosecution had eliminated any sympathy the court might have had for someone claiming to be manipulated by his parents rather than an active participant in their crimes. The Mitchell family business empire collapsed under the weight of legal judgments, criminal restitution orders, and the complete destruction of their reputation within Chicago's business community. Real estate holdings that had been built over 3 generations were sold to satisfy court orders and legal expenses, marking the end of a family dynasty that had been constructed on systematic exploitation of trust and family relationships. Charitable organizations that had received Mitchell family donations faced their own legal and ethical challenges as investigators determined which gifts had been made with legitimately earned money versus funds stolen from family trusts. Several foundations returned donations entirely rather than risk association with criminal activity, while others faced lawsuits from victims seeking recovery of their stolen assets. The broader impact extended to other elite Chicago families as prosecutors and journalists began investigating similar patterns of financial exploitation within wealthy dynasties. The Mitchell case had demonstrated that systematic family financial abuse was both more common and more easily prosecuted than previously understood, encouraging other victims to come forward with their own stories of exploitation and theft. Society's reaction was swift and permanent. The Mitchell name was removed from hospital wings, university buildings, and charitable foundations where it had previously been displayed with honor. Country club memberships were revoked, charity board positions were terminated, and the social standing that had taken generations to build disappeared entirely within months of the criminal convictions. 5 years after walking onto that Palmer House stage with my grandmothers while clutched in trembling hands, I've learned that justice and healing follow different timelines. The legal victory was complete within 18 months, but rebuilding a life shattered by family betrayal required patient reconstruction of everything from professional relationships to basic trust in human nature. The inheritance money that I fought so hard to reclaim became the foundation for something my grandmother would have celebrated. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation for Family Financial Protection provides legal assistance to other victims of financial exploitation, particularly within families where traditional power dynamics make it difficult for victims to seek help. What started as my personal battle has become a mission to help others recognize and escape similar patterns of abuse. My legal practice evolved beyond traditional corporate work to focus exclusively on family financial protection and elder abuse prevention. The expertise gained through fighting my own family's corruption translated into specialized knowledge that helped other families avoid similar exploitation. Cases that once would have been dismissed as family disagreements are now recognized as serious financial crimes deserving of prosecution and civil remedy. Writing Blood Money. A Family's Legacy of Financial Abuse took 3 years of therapy and careful legal review, but the book has become an important resource for attorneys, social workers, and family members trying to understand how financial exploitation operates within seemingly respectable families. Speaking engagements have taken me across the country, sharing lessons learned from my experience while advocating for stronger legal protections against family financial abuse. The professional recognition has been gratifying, but more important is the feedback from readers and seminar attendees who recognize their own family dynamics in my story. Letters from daughters who discovered they weren't crazy when they questioned family financial decisions, from sons who found courage to challenge inheritance manipulations, and from grandchildren who learned to protect elderly relatives from systematic exploitation. Emotional healing required accepting that some relationships are irreparable regardless of blood connections or shared history. My parents served their prison sentences without acknowledgement of wrongdoing or expression of genuine remorse for the pain they caused. They maintained that they were loving parents trying to protect family assets, that my accusations were motivated by jealousy and mental instability, and that their prosecution was a miscarriage of justice. Contact with them is non-existent by mutual choice. They made clear through intermediaries that any relationship would require my public acknowledgement that grief and jealousy had motivated false accusations against innocent family members. I made clear through my attorneys that their continued denial of responsibility eliminated any possibility of reconciliation or forgiveness. Tyler's path toward rehabilitation has been more complex and ultimately more hopeful. Prison rehabilitation programs forced him to confront his lifelong dependence on others to solve his problems and provide his identity. Therapy helped him understand how being the golden child had actually prevented him from developing genuine competence or self-worth independent of family validation. Our relationship rebuilt slowly and cautiously after his release. He completed restitution requirements and enrolled in graduate school to develop legitimate career skills rather than relying on family connections and stolen money. Most importantly, he acknowledged the full extent of his participation in our parents' crimes and accepted responsibility for his role in my professional and personal destruction. I spent 31 years being their perfect son, which meant I never learned how to be a decent human being on my own, Tyler reflected during one of our monthly coffee meetings. Fighting you wasn't about the money or even family loyalty. It was about protecting the only identity I'd ever known, even though that identity was completely fake. Forgiveness with Tyler became possible because he demonstrated genuine change through actions rather than just words. He testified voluntarily in several other family financial abuse cases, using his experience to help prosecutors understand how these schemes operate from the perpetrator's perspective. His cooperation has been instrumental in convictions that might not have been possible without insider knowledge of criminal family dynamics. New relationships have been built on foundations of honesty and mutual respect rather than shared history or social expectations. Marcus Thompson became a close friend and occasional collaborative partner on investigative projects exposing other family financial abuse cases. Linda Rodriguez joined my foundation's board of directors, applying her accounting expertise to help other victims document and prove their cases. Romantic relationships required learning to trust again after experiencing the deepest possible betrayal from people who claimed to love me. Therapy helped me understand the difference between love and control, between family loyalty and family exploitation, between supporting someone and enabling their destructive behavior. Dr. Martinez's guidance was essential in recognizing that healthy relationships are characterized by mutual respect for independence and personal growth, rather than attempts to control or manipulate behavior through emotional or financial leverage. The patterns I'd experienced within my family weren't love, regardless of how they were labeled or justified. Professional success has exceeded anything I could have imagined during those dark months when my family's warfare seemed likely to destroy my career entirely. The Mitchell Foundation for Family Financial Protection has helped more than 200 families recover stolen assets and prosecute financial abuse cases. Speaking engagements and consulting work have established me as a nationally recognized expert in an area of law that increasingly demands attention from prosecutors and advocacy groups. The most meaningful recognition came when Northwestern Law School established the Savannah Mitchell Fellowship for students interested in family financial protection and elder abuse law. Knowing that my experience had created opportunities for future lawyers to specialize in protecting vulnerable family members from systematic exploitation felt like the completion of a cycle that began with my grandmother's foresight in leaving me the resources to fight back. Personal fulfillment comes not from the money or professional recognition, but from understanding that my battle prevented other family members from experiencing similar exploitation. The cousins whose trust funds might have been next, the elderly relatives who could have been manipulated in their final years, the grandchildren who would have inherited nothing because their legacy had been systematically stolen. 5 years later, I understand that my grandmother's inheritance was never really about the money itself. Eleanor Mitchell had watched her son Richard manipulate and control other family members through financial leverage for decades, and she'd chosen to give me the resources necessary to break that cycle of abuse permanently. The $15 million was a weapon designed to destroy a pattern of exploitation that could have continued for generations. The wisdom gained through surviving systematic family betrayal has taught me to distinguish between people who love you for who you are and people who need to control you for what you represent. Real love supports your independence and celebrates your success, even when it threatens family dynamics or challenges established power structures. Financial independence isn't just about having enough money to live comfortably. It's about having the resources necessary to make choices based on your values rather than your survival needs. My grandmother understood that women in our family had been controlled through economic dependence for generations, and she deliberately broke that pattern by giving me the means to fight back when that control was inevitably exercised. The most important lesson has been that standing up for truth sometimes requires standing alone, at least initially. Justice doesn't always arrive quickly, and doing the right thing doesn't guarantee immediate support from people around you. Sometimes the people who claim to love you will choose their own comfort over your well-being, and sometimes fighting back will cost you relationships that weren't as genuine as you believed. But truth has its own power, and courage inspires others to find their own strength. Every victim who comes forward, every family member who refuses to participate in exploitation, every professional who chooses integrity over profit contributes to a larger change in how society addresses financial abuse within families. Looking back at that moment on the Palmer House stage when I announced that you can't give away money you don't own, I realized I was speaking a truth that extended far beyond my immediate situation. Family love cannot be purchased with stolen money, respect cannot be maintained through criminal behavior, and reputation built on systematic exploitation will ultimately collapse when exposed to honest examination. What questions did this story bring up about your own family dynamics? Have you ever wondered whether the financial decisions being made around you are really in your best interest, or whether someone might be taking advantage of family trust for their own gain? Share your thoughts in the comments, because these conversations help other people recognize warning signs they might be missing. If this story opened your eyes to family financial abuse patterns, please like this video and subscribe for more true stories about standing up to family manipulation and finding justice when everyone seems to be against you. Share this with someone who needs to hear that fighting for the truth is worth it, even when it costs everything you thought mattered. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the family you choose is more loyal than the family you're born into. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that abuse is actually love.